Welcome to this episode of Whole New Tech World. With me today, we have Raj, who's currently working at Lotterywest. Raj, would you like to introduce yourself and just talk about your experience and where you're coming from?
I've been working at Lotterywest for about 8 months. I did some work before this in Laconic, and I did my master's in data science with UWA.
And what's your role at Lotterywest? What are you doing there?
It is called Data Analyst.
It's between data engineering and data analysis work at the moment, and we kind of jump between data science at times as well. So it's not just data analysis.
And do you want to just explain sort of that data analysis, data science sort of split, and maybe some of the things that you would put in each of those, show the overlap or where the different parts of your roles are?
Yeah, this is one of the interesting stuff that we never talk in uni. A graduate from uni, like me personally, I did not know what was the difference between data engineering or data analysis or data science. It honestly took me a while, maybe even around 8-9 months to figure out what really was the difference. What I found out was data engineering is most of the stuffs where we take raw data that comes into the organization, maybe in interface files or notepad or even from government websites. You download those data and make them useful. You make a data warehouse or maybe even small and tiny tables that are used for data analysis and data science. The first process of collecting data and putting it in a data warehouse is the process that data engineering does from my point of view, and it's a lot of extraction, loading and transformation stuff.
Using this data to analyze or see what an organization is doing, how an organization is doing it, and using the data to kind of foresee the future is what data analysis does. Using the data to extract information for better decision making. And data science is a whole new thing where you use the data, put it in a machine learning model and extract information that you need.
Yeah, so looking at those three areas of data science, data analysis and data engineering, what's sort of the breakdown in terms of your role? How much of each are you sort of doing?
So it really depends. At Lotterywest, what we do is we help other teams with whatever data they need. At times, it would be helping people in marketing team or helping the data engineers in the team to get the files and load them in our data warehouse. Sometimes predicting what sales are going to look like. Yeah, it's everywhere.
That's interesting. So yeah, so I suppose just, maybe you're talking a little bit about your actual role. So how did you find this role? Did you just apply online? And what do you think has been valuable for you to bring into this role in terms of, you said you've worked a little bit previously or through your studies? What is something that have been standout that have really helped?
For me personally, it was persistence. Landing a first job is a very hard thing to do. During your studies, it's even harder. When I was studying, I talked to this guy. So I saw an advertisement on our uni career page. It was from Laconic and they were hiring some data scientists. So what I did was, I was like, can you give me an intern? I'm really keen to help. I'm kind of keen to learn and use the data science skills and apply it in our real field. I emailed him. He was in America that time. So he was like, can you email me after a month? We don't have the role at the moment. So I did it after a month and he said that there was no vacancy at that time. They'd already hired someone else. He was like, can you email me again after a month? And when I did it after a month again, he said the same thing. So I followed up for 3 times before getting my first role, which I did it for like quite a while, maybe around 3-4 months. I reckon they liked what I did and then offered me a part-time position there.
And do you think that role definitely helped you move into the role you're on in the moment?
Yeah, it really did. So when you get inside an organization, what you gain, which is valuable the most, is you have this all sort of experience that you can talk about. So whenever you go on an interview, the questions they would ask, you would not know, or like they'd ask like, what have you done? And then you would have nothing to talk about. So working with Laconic, very, very intelligent guys there, they helped me a lot. And uni doesn't teaches you stuff like coding in a proper way, naming conventions. They don't teach you stuff like that. So Laconic taught me a lot.
Yeah, so you think that, that's really what set you apart, having an experience there that you could actually talk about rather than other students coming out only having group assignments or things like that, and that really being able to talk through, I know what I'm talking about. I've done this for a few months. I'm not just coming out. So talking about your career then a bit, so now you're at Lotterywest and you're doing a bit of a mix of stuff. Is this sort of what you're interested in? Where do you see sort of your career going? Is it good to get a mix of a few different types, thing from data engineering to data science, or do you think that you're leaning towards one more than the other now that you've experienced it for a little bit?
After graduating from uni wouldn't teach you stuff such
separated, so you wouldn't know what data engineering is on a daily basis, or what data analysis is, or what data science is. I reckon coming out of the uni and grabbing all these experience and having knowledge in all these different platforms had given me a base to rely on. If I choose to go work as a data engineer, I wouldn't have any problem, or data scientist, I wouldn't have any problem, or even these new roles that are coming up like machine learning engineer, I wouldn't have a problem, because I feel like I have enough base so that I can build the other knowledges up. I wouldn't mind working anywhere in any industry as long as it's related to data.
So you're quite open, and you think having that very broad role is something that you actually enjoy, rather than doing something very specific, having the opportunity to do a bit here and a bit there, and having projects that work on with different skills. So talking a little bit maybe then about your skills, sort of what are the more technical skills that you would use around, programming languages or maybe pieces of software? What is sort of the bread and butter, or the role that you're doing? What do you find you're using the most?
At the moment at Lotterywest, we use a lot of R. It's a statistical tool rather than programming. A lot of people like to say that. It's kind of faster in so many different ways, but personally, I'm a Python guy. Don't get me wrong.
You just end up using R now.
Yeah, for two reasons. One of the reasons is the whole organization uses it, and whatever I develop in Python would be redundant, and nobody would be using it. The other reason that I say that R is faster is because it uses vectors rather than lists. We also do use SQL. Everybody uses SQL. It's a very important skill to have. Coming out from UWA, I really liked how UWA teaches cloud, and it's very important in so many organizations. I don't see any organization not using cloud in next 5 years. I reckon it's a very important skill to have.
We'll talk about cloud then for a second. So do you use a specific cloud, and do you directly use the cloud, or is it more sitting behind the systems and it's sort of, out of sight?
We are moving into using cloud-based analytics platforms. At the moment, we are not using cloud directly until now, but what we're doing is, because we're moving to cloud, we're doing a lot of testing. If we move on to the cloud-based analytics platform that I was talking about, we would...
Yes, things rapidly changing, and you're going to have to pick up these new skills. And it's good to get fundamental skills at university, but you never know how fast things will change. Yeah. Is there anything that you didn't learn at university, sort of languages or software that you've had to pick up sort of from the beginning since you started working?
I've done a bit of coding in .NET and React, which I did not learn in uni.
I think that's interesting though, that, if you talk about .NET and React, though, is that you're not going to learn everything at university, right? There are going to be gaps in your knowledge, and you have to be sort of, willing and ready to pick those up. So I think that's interesting to show that, that has been your experience, that a lot of students don't know what those gaps are, and they're very much going to depend on where you're going, right? So every organization is going to use a slightly different mix, and that's just an example. Like, I didn't cover React as well at university at all, but it's so common in front end, right? So it's something that, it was always on my radar that might come up, and it's really interesting to see that, you've done a bit of sort of things. So that's quite interesting to show that you sort of need to be on top of what are the things that are used quite commonly in the industry, and what might come up that are, outside of the university education.
Other stuff like calling API, REST API, mostly JSON formatting, XML formatting, stuff like these are really important, because you don't know when they're going to be useful. It just comes up.
It's all those sort of edge skills, right? Which are like, they don't really fit in a specific thing. Like calling APIs, you're never going to have a unit on APIs, but as you start to use libraries and external services, they become really, really important. And setting up a REST API is, a task unto itself kind of thing. And I think it's interesting that you point that out. These sort of things that maybe students have got to take it upon themselves to look into and actually have a play around with, and never knowing how useful it's going to be in the future.
Yeah, that is true. And we used a lot of geospatial API as well, Google and OpenStreetMaps, and I reckon they're really useful for a lot of GIS stuff. And provided that they're free, just use it, have fun with it.
Yeah, that's also something like you'd love to have a project that you can do on your own where you just play around and see if the Google Map stuff, it's there and it's cool to use. So talking about your studies then, so if we could rewind back to when you started studying, you're just about to kick off your Master of Data Science, what sort of a piece of advice do you think that you'd give yourself there? Is there something that you would do differently? Like, it doesn't have to be a major thing, but something that you think would really have improved your experience during your studies, or would have put you in a better place now that you've graduated?
If I had to go back, what I would do is I would look at all the jobs that are in the market, and based on those required skills, I would choose my units and try to learn the stuffs that are actually required in the market, rather than what the uni offers or what units are easier or how to get more points.
Do you have an example of something that maybe stands out, or with the hindsight, right? Everything's better with hindsight, but something that you look back that maybe is an example of that for students who are currently at UWA, for example, or what the technical skill potentially is?
UWA offers computer vision, which I did, and I'm quite happy that I did it, because a lot of organizations are looking for data science people who does work with computer
computer vision. And when I go into an interview, I will not have nothing to talk about. I'd have at least one thing to talk about, even though if it's a small project that I did in uni. Another unit that's quite interesting, but I think it's mandatory, is cloud computing. Even though it's focused on AWS, it kind of gives you a whole knowledge on how a cloud works.
And I think that's really interesting though, what you're saying. So with things like cloud computing, which we talked about, and computer vision, would you recommend then sort of looking in the market, doing a little bit of research and going, these are some trends that are, increasing. Like there's a lot more sensors and video data. There's a lot of, as we said, there's a big move to use the cloud, and trying to pick up those elective units which aren't compulsory, to fill out your degree if especially at UWA where you can, things that are more aligned to what the market is saying is important or where that sort of hype is. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and I think that's what, like I said, I love cloud computing, and I'm really happy that I did it. And that's my role, right? I'm going into cloud computing. So if I hadn't done that unit, I probably wouldn't be where I am right now. But like I think as well, like what you said around computer vision is quite interesting. Around I did natural language processing, which again is something that's quite of a hot topic at the moment with chatbots and natural language, and trying to make things sound like they're written by humans. So I think it's, as you said, like trying to figure out where the current demand is, which isn't always easy, I think, as well, where I don't think when I started I would have known where to look to see what was actually interesting or in demand.
A lot of people wouldn't know about natural language processing or computer vision or stuff like this, which is already in the market. If you just find jobs in LinkedIn, if you look at like 5 or 6 of them, they'd have it there. I never knew that I could just that easily accessible.
Oh, it's okay. That's a good tip then. So looking through sort of job postings and looking at the skills required at the beginning of your degree to sort of inform what are the skills that are actually demanded. And then I suppose looking at it regularly to see if those things are changing over time as you go throughout your course, studying for a couple of years. I think definitely things have changed since I started studying. So that's interesting. I never really thought about that. I always went the other way, where I built my skills based on what the course was, and then I try to find a job that matched my skills or what I was interested in.
I would also say don't go towards something that's in high but you're not interested in. You should definitely consider your interest as well.
I think that's the challenging thing though, because you probably don't know what you're interested at the beginning, and it's sort of
that is true.
If you think it's hyped and you think there's demand, take the unit, and if you hate it, then go, well, at least I tried and I've got something interesting to talk about in a interview or something like that. I've definitely had units like that where I'm like, this is interesting, but I don't want to do this for what?
And some of them are mandatory.
and that's the challenge, I suppose, with structured university education, right? Is that there's always going to be required units, and there's always going to be required units that are useless for certain career paths, right? So the data science course at UWA is quite good in terms of it's broad for preparing you for a data science career, not a specific career within that sort of umbrella scope, right? So that's always going to be the challenge. And I think that's where places like self-study or even more focused boot camps may actually sort of have a leg up, where you can only learn what you actually want to learn, but then you lose that breadth of knowledge as well. So pros and cons on both sides, I think. But I think for UWA specifically, the electives are really what I think students need to pay more attention to. And for me, like I didn't really until sort of my second year start to really think about putting together a degree that actually was what I wanted to learn and to develop the skills that I wanted to have. At the beginning, I was sort of just like, what fits and what sounds interesting and what are my friends doing more than anything? They're the best source of truth about what's actually good or not. So in terms of advice then, so, continue on, like, maybe for yourself, you could rewind time, but, now looking at, for current students, sort of where we are heading into 2022, what sort of advice would you give them maybe that we haven't already talked around, preparing to graduate, like that transition into the workforce, I think is a big thing, because a lot of students, whether at the undergraduate or the postgraduate level, may not have actually had a working experience before. And what do you think is something that is really valuable to make that sort of transition? Because it is quite a jump, especially if you've never worked before.
The first thing that I would do if I was transitioning out of my uni and if I had no work with the knowledge that I have at the moment is I would attend as much as events that I can, because the technology field or the data field in Perth is not very huge. And if you go to an event, there would be at least maybe 30 different organizations coming towards that event. And if you talk to every one of them, they'd remember your faces. And if they know that you're looking for a job, even though they can't offer you a job, they would definitely try to help you, because everybody's helpful if you talk to them.
On that, so talking about networking events then, so I think everyone knows that they're so valuable, but would you say to go in trying to find a job? Because I think that that's probably quite daunting for a lot of students, but more going in to build your network, right? To meet like-minded people. And if you happen to get a job out of it, great. If you don't, you've met some interesting people, you've learned something, you've talked about something interesting, which is probably a little less intimidating, especially if you're a sort of a 21-year-old student coming straight out of university.
So if an organization is hiring and then
you talk about that, and you would be scared to apply. And if you talk about that job with that person, sometimes that person is the person who's going to interview you. So you'd already be comfortable. It would help you a lot.
I think my other tip for networking events is go with someone. Make one friend in your course and just go with them at least. It's a lot less daunting if you're walking around as a pair rather than by yourself.
I've been to a lot of networking events while I was uni, and I went to all of those by myself. I used to hear what people say and then just leave. For the networking events, the ending part is very important. It's very crucial if you are in your early careers or if you're starting a career.
I think as well, like if it's not going to get you that first job, it's definitely going to help you with that second job, right? Like when you've got a bit of experience, you've got something behind you and you want to make that career move, knowing someone where you're going to go is always going to be useful.
And also the competitions, like HackerRank, like there is a website right there, HackerRank, and I did not know about it until last year. It's a very cool piece of website if you want to build your Python or SQL knowledge. And if you talk about you solving that problems in HackerRank to the employees who are interviewing you, they'd be impressed when you even start talking about it, because I don't think a lot of people have heard about this or are using it at the moment, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue for, I would like to say tech in general, is that there's just a lack of visibility about a lot of these things. And, even Data Science with Daniel has that problem. Like we do a lot of things, but if people don't have that face time, they don't know these things are there or these resources are available. HackerRank's a great example. Like I use HackerRank. Yeah. I've used it to learn skills. I use it to tell people what is quite interesting to, develop new skills. But if you don't know what's there, you don't use it. And I think HackerRank's also a great opportunity where you can learn something that's outside your course. And if you have no experience, you can talk about solving a problem. Of course, it's like a fake problem that's just provided, but it's still solving a problem and you can still talk through what it's like. And it's essentially a technical interview. If you are going for a place that does that, it's going to be exactly the same, right? So getting some experience there. And I've had interviews that use HackerRank as their technical interview.
Yeah.
For those in the United States, leak code and all that, everything's the same kind of thing. It's those sort of coding problems. So that's good. And I think as well, I think that networking events is great. I suppose it's a little bit challenging in sort of the last few years with the pandemic has always been hard. And I've been to virtual networking events, which is good to hear about the topic. But I think, as you've rightly pointed out, it's the people you meet in those after and before conversations where the value is, rather than what specifically is the point of the talk or the content being presented. All right. So can we just talk about maybe something specific you've done in your role? What's something that, you've done? What sort of the skills that you brought to things? What sort of happened or what was required from you, and sort of how, just sort of walking through how that project would work?
I talk about one of the first things that I did at Laconic when I started my internship. The previous guy who worked before me, who did an internship there, downloaded all this data. He scraped this data from all these fertilizer websites. So a government would have a website to record how much fertilizer has been applied, in every part of paddock, and what are the changes, and record the changes in the plant on a monthly basis, and plotted a regression curve using all these machine learning algorithms. We went up from linear regression to random forest. So we used a lot of different algorithms, but what we found out was it was not plausible. Like using random forest requires a lot of data. And if you have a lot of bad data with a lot of nulls, and if the data is not complete, then it would not make sense to use all these hyped machine learning algorithms. It is good if you have a very good set of data, but at this case, we actually ended up using polynomial regression and a regression called Michulich curve, which is a very traditional curve, and they were most reactive to what data we have.
How did that project end up? So once you fit your regression, was that sort of the end for what you were involved with then as sort of a data scientist?
Plotting a regression curve was the first thing that we had to do. The end result was what we were extracting after plotting that curve. So we wanted to know how much fertilizer you have to put for a plant to grow to its optimum level. So we wanted to find that point in that curve where we know how much fertilizer we have to put. The regression curve would bend after a while, but we wanted to know that the point where that tipping begins. It's a management problem as well. So how much investment you have to do for a return.
What would you have done differently? Is there anything looking back that maybe you would have made things more efficient or maybe would have worked a little bit better? You talked about having some unclean data as well, which is never a good thing to have when you're trying to do, machine learning?
I can't think of anything that I would have done differently. I would definitely talk to my supervisor a lot more, and I would go back to my uni teachers and ask them how would they solve this problem.
So let's talk about that then. So you think that, really you wouldn't change a lot of the technical stuff, but around the communication, so talking more with the people in your team, you said your manager, and talking and reaching out to people, to experts essentially from the university or from elsewhere to get their views on that problem. Do you think that sort of sharing and communication is really would have made this project either easier or faster or whatever it is?
I would say it would make it more efficient. First, after making sure that it's okay to share whatever the information that you're sharing, I reckon getting expert advice. And obviously, this was a statistical problem. And if I reached out to some statistics professors in my uni, I see why not they wouldn't help. They would just say, I would solve this problem like this. And then.
So let's talk about that again. So you think that then building those relationships with your professors at uni is really an important thing. And how have you found that then? Do you think you would reach back out to them if you had a problem now? Do you think you developed that relationship, or is that something that you would have liked to maybe, do a little bit more while you still were a student?
Me personally, I did not reach to them a lot when I was in uni as well. Even when I had a problem, I tried my best to solve it by myself. And if that doesn't happen, ask friends. But if I was in uni, I'd probably ask my professors a lot more. Their advice would have been better. Yeah, don't get me wrong, but group work with friends teaches a lot. These are kind of skills that you are employers are actually looking for. I don't think they want people who knows a lot about data. They would want more people who can talk about data and explain data to those people who don't understand the data. Uni teaches a lot of these stuff, even though they're not teaching it directly. And these are the skills that you have to pick up as well. They would ask you to do a group project, but they would not say, do it this way. And they would not teach you the effectiveness of group communication and how to speak to someone else and how to deal with someone else, how to deal with a difficult situation and stuff like that. But you kind of learn it when you're at uni.
And so have you found that's been your experience now working that, we all hate being in a crap group or having people that don't do their part and things like that. But those are sort of the experience, or even having, a project that's really not well defined, that you don't really know what's being asked. Do you find that those experiences have definitely helped a lot with now what it's actually like in the workplace?
Yeah, a lot of problems are not clearly defined at any point of time, I guess. They're only defined properly in exams or assignments. You kind of have to figure out what the problem is, because a person who gives you the problem might not always be a person who's an expert in data field. For example, I'm doing this marketing campaign. How can I increase my sales by doing this campaign? How much money do I have to invest? And if I invest maybe $1 million, how much return do I get with that investment? Then you'd be staring to the person and you would not know how to solve this problem.
So you think that sort of the business side of things around understanding the problem and defining what's actually being asked and understanding the scope and is it actually feasible is just as important as sort of that technical side and actually being able to then deliver on that.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting because I don't think that, that's really explicitly taught in a lot of places. As you said, everything's really clearly defined. You get an assignment, here's what it is, here's the rubric, this is what you need to get 100 kind of thing. It's really easy to sort of see that what you need to put in and what you need to get out. But in the real world, it's less defined. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's often defined by people who have no idea about the data.
That is true. And a lot of presentations that you give in the organization, you would be presenting those presentations not to your professors, because professors know what you're talking about. And if you use a specific term like random forest, a professor would be like, oh yeah, random forest. But explain that to maybe your father, I guess. He'd be like, what forest? And that are the sorts of difficulties that you have to deal with when you started.
So looking at communication skills and presenting, do you do a lot of that then in your role? Like, do you present to people with those technical abilities and understanding and people without? Is there what sort of mix is that, and how often would that sort of be?
It kind of depends. So as I said, my role kind of changes from time to time. When I do a lot of analysis stuff, I do have a lot of people who don't have a data background. So when I explain them these stuff, or even when I'm talking to my partner, for example, she would not know a thing that I'm talking about, and I have to put it in a certain way that she understands. And I think that's one of the skills that you might want to have. I enjoy explaining things to the people who don't know about data, because you just see this chunk of data in a spreadsheet or in a database. And what I think to myself is everything is right there that the organization needs. I just need to find what information that's inside the data and put it in a certain way that people would actually get what would help them make their decisions. That's the one thing that I like about what I do.
That's interesting to hear, and I think that's the main thing as well. Like, you always want to be interested in what you do and have that enjoyment, and it's good that you, I suppose, from your perspective, you can see that the data's all there, and what your role is just figuring out what you need to do. It's also a lot easier than if you didn't have the data at all and you don't know what you do. Then you're sort of just, wandering around in the dark kind of thing. Let's talk about growth. What's something that excites you? So what's sort of an area of tech that you think is quite interesting? We could have already covered it in our chat. Or what's something that you think over sort of the short term, so maybe the next 3 to 5 years, that you think is quite interesting or is going to grow a lot, and maybe that's something that you might want to either get more information about or something that you might want to move into?
If I were starting my career, I would do the same thing and try to get a lot of experience around data engineering, data analysis, and data science stuff. But on my current phase, what I'm trying a lot to do is trying to get a hold onto cloud and trying to figure out how these cloud works. And I'm finding it pretty hard because they're not free.
That's always the challenge with using these sort of tools, is that there's a balance between wanting to learn and the cost to learn.
Yeah. And you could easily spend thousands of dollars within an hour. You got to be aware of what you're doing as well. I'd be a lot keen to learn more about Azure or AWS or Google. It doesn't really matter from my perspective, because if you have a basic knowledge of one, you would have a basic knowledge of other, even though they might be different.
All the clouds do pretty much the same basic stuff, right? They just call their services different. And there are points of difference, of course, and there are price differences, but when you look at things like storage and compute and serverless stuff, they're all the same.
These are the tools that are actually required in every organization. Maybe stuff like SageMaker, I don't think a lot of companies will be using it, but stuff like buckets and EC2 instance, every organization will be using it.
So that's quite interesting. So SageMaker is the machine learning from AWS, for those that don't know. So maybe not the really specialized tools or the really advanced stuff, but definitely the basics around storage and compute, using buckets and virtual machines. Those sort of basic stuff is always going to be around it, and it's really interesting. So I suppose, to sum up what you're saying, cloud is a really good unit to take. Definitely recommend. It is an elective now at way, so definitely get some exposure there. But you think that that's definitely going to keep growing, as it has been growing over the last 3 to 5 years, 10 years almost, exploding in popularity as people move more cloud first. And you think and I suppose that's what you're saying. Lotterywest is starting to look at that, and there definitely sounds like it's an interesting path that they're taking. So I think that being able to develop those skills, and I think the biggest thing is understanding that that's a skill that you want to develop. If I'm a student right now, like, I want to be developing some basic level of skills, right? Because you never know when it's going to come up for you. If you had to jump forward an unknown number of years to your next role, maybe within Lotterywest or maybe with someone else, what do you think you would be doing? Do you think that there's a specific technical skill or specific type of thing that you want to be more involved in, or is there a specific field that you maybe want to change? Lotterywest has a very specific sort of area that it operates in. Is there anything that you would sort of foresee? And I'm not going to hold you to it, of course. You never know where you're going to end up. But do you see something that that might be that next step? In the sort of short to medium term.
On a short term, apart from learning cloud, I would really want my skills to be developed on closing the gap between technical and non-technical people, which is what I've said. With this skill, what I think would help me is if I manage a team or if I have to manage someone, I would be able to teach that person, and I would also be able to talk to the stakeholders without any problem. When you lead a team, you'd be dealing much more with the people without the data background, and that's one of the skills that I would want to train myself in, I guess.
Sure. So let's talk about that. So that sort of more translation role between, business and technical. So it's obviously a very key thing, because there are so many people that don't have a technology background or don't understand that. But you mentioned something around teaching, right? So if you had someone that was reporting to you or someone in your team that you were teaching, you think that would definitely help being able to do that translation. So would you say that developing those skills, even if, as you say, talking to your family or your friends that aren't doing technical things about what you do in a little bit more detail and trying to educate or share or sort of being able to explain it in their terms, that would definitely help you develop those skills, even if that's outside the workplace or before you even get into a job?
Yeah, that is true. That is one of the skills. And if you talk to your mom and explain her what you do in your uni, I reckon she'd like to listen. And then if you can explain it to her, then you can explain it to a lot of people. Yeah, that's one of the skills that is extremely necessary in the field, I guess, at the moment. If you end up in a consultancy business, because there are a lot of consultancy business in Perth, and if you end up in one of these organizations, that's a very crucial skill to have.
So do you think that that's something you would recommend for students then to look at and go, you know what, while you're studying, talk to your family, talk to your friends, like just explain about the unit, the project, the assignment, like whatever it is, just try and talk to it. And even if they don't end up actually understanding, at least you start to get practice around the words that they know, or what is something that's just too technical that you really need to filter down.
And if you talk about an algorithm, it's kind of straightforward, and I don't see why any person wouldn't be able to understand it. Because if you think about neural network, that's how a human brain works, and we're basically incorporating that into a computer or a decision tree, which is very simple. I actually explained what a random forest is to a group of people who had no technical background, and they really loved it, because what we did there as an organization was we were selling these algorithms, but these people who are selling these algorithms did not know what a random forest was. So they would just say that this is a very good model, and then this model would do this, but they were not aware of what that model was. So when I explained what random forest was, they really appreciated it and benefit both the business and them as well, having this knowledge.
I think that's good for students and develop. I think the only thing on that then is you need to have a good understanding of what's going on as well to be able to cut through the technical jargon, essentially, because if you don't know what's going on, it's going to be very difficult to translate it for someone who has no idea what you're talking about. And I think that that's potentially one thing that is not really widely covered at sort of a formal university education where, you know, because units are taught by experts in the field, right? So you're being taught and you're conversing with people that know what they're talking about. So you can just say random forest and they know everything about it, kind of thing, rather than talking to people that are in business courses, for example, or are in, you know, medical sciences or something, people that are going to get value from data science but don't know anything about data science. And I think that's where things like capstone projects or, you know, as you're just talking to friends and family around these sort of things for you to develop those skills and meet people that are interested but don't have that sort of formal education. Side projects then. So do you do your own sort of projects outside of work or outside of uni when you were studying? And do you feel that if you do, does that help you develop these sort of skills?
It does a lot. So when I was doing Masters of Data Science, I had a lot of interest in machine learning and I did not have a lot of interest in data engineering and data analysis stuff, which is quite common for students, I guess. And I did a lot of code trying to predict stock market and whatnot. Using these are quite helpful when you go for an interview as well. It's always good to have something to talk about when you're in an interview.
Yeah, of course. And what about the technical skills then? Do you think that your technical skills improve by doing these things on the side that, you know, weren't part of your course?
A lot, yeah.
And what about now? So do you, I suppose, you know, working is, you know, normally a bigger commitment than studying. Do you find that you're still doing some of these things on the side, you know, maybe not to the same level, but, you know, something that are of interest?
I'm actually doing it much more than how much I did it in uni. When I was in uni, I felt like I was learning enough and I did not want to go home and, you know, code more, or after finishing uni, I did not want to look at one more line of code. But now what I do is after finishing work, I don't want to look at work stuff anymore, but I don't know. I'm much more interested in what data can do. And I do a lot of side stuff and learning. I think every week I listen to or I look at least 4 or 5 videos around cloud, because that's the skill that I'm trying to learn at the moment. So I actually learn quite a lot of videos around cloud at the moment.
And, you know, if people are interested in cloud and that sort of thing, I suppose, where do you go? Do you mostly go on YouTube then and that sort of thing to find that sort of content, or what's sort of for you the way that you learn then?
Yeah, UWA is really good because they have a thing called LinkedIn Learning and it's free for UWA students. It's a really good platform to start learning. Even if you're doing AWS, there is a free learning cycle that you can enroll yourself into for cloud practitioner. I reckon all of these cloud platforms, if you want to start with the basic, I don't think they charge you to learn.
That's cool. And so, you know, picking what you want to learn and then looking for AWS or Azure for cloud or, you know, GCP and finding their learning resources then really helps. And I suppose then for your side projects as well, you know, you're saying you're doing a lot more and you're learning a lot more. Do you think then picking something that you're actually interested in is a big factor there, where you actually want to come home after working, you know, 8 hours a day and actually do something?
I honestly get bored sometimes with coding, or, you know, if there is a project that I want to do, I'd be thinking about it constantly. So when I come home, I try to code myself a small algorithm that I think about, and maybe think about how this can turn to a business. And I kind of look around the websites and see if someone is already doing that, and trying to add everything up and see how they are doing it. And yeah, it just gets deeper and interesting day by day when I start doing stuff like this.
Well, and that's good to hear. And that's what, you'd hope for people that are in these sort of fields, that, you are actually interested. And, even after working, a whole week of work, you're more than happy to go home and still do very similar things. But, you get to decide what you want to do. And those are the sort of people
that is
definitely driving things forward and, inventing really cool stuff. You're probably not going to change the world working at Lotterywest or any real company, right? But, you could invent something that you've just found an issue and then solve that problem. And you never know what that's going to be.
What students are missing out is how easy it is to build your own portfolio website. You can develop a website for yourself within a week or within like 10 days, and it wouldn't cost you a bit if you choose the right platform and stuff. But I feel like a lot of students are missing out there. You can basically Google personal portfolio website and you'd find 10 different GitHub links, and they're all free.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I think that's for me, for Data Science with Daniel, running the website cost me 50 cents a month to run the website. So and that's above and beyond what it actually needs to cost. So I think that in terms of web, there's some very cheap. There's also some very expensive options, but I think there's some very cheap options, especially if you're just doing it. And I think that you sort of hit the nail on the head a bit with cloud, where you don't want to be spending a lot. And I think that's for me when I use cloud for my projects. My biggest worry is I'm going to wake up to a $10,000 bill. So it's keeping tabs on that. But I think that also shows your cloud skills, right? And setting up the right restrictions and picking the right services and setting things up correctly, that you're not going to be in the hole for that much money because something's gone wrong that you haven't thought about. And I think that's definitely a big barrier for a lot of people because they don't want to have that risk. But if you know what you're doing, it's very easy to spend not a lot of money and get some really cool stuff. But it's knowing where to put that effort, and it's knowing how to set those things up. And I think that's where you're saying that developing those skills, then in the future they're going to be valuable, whether you use them at work or whether you use them on your side projects or your portfolio or whatever. For me, and I love cloud, I'm going to work in cloud, it's a great skill to have. And I think that the more you know about it, it's never going to be something that's not useful, especially in sort of the short to medium term. Who knows in the future, but there's always going to be a requirement to store stuff and to compute stuff, and no one wants to be going out and buying servers.
I don't think any organization moving forward would still buy servers anymore.
Thanks, Raj, for taking the time to talk about your experience. So this was an episode of Whole New Tech World. If you found this interesting, then stay tuned for more episodes from other recent graduates about their experiences. I'll reach out to myself or Raj. I'm sure we're both happy to talk about our experiences or about, data science or technology in general and the transition moving from a student to employee. Thanks, Raj, making the time. And good luck with Lotterywest.